spent about 4.5 years in an organization down in Tucson, Arizona called Abrams Airborne Manufacturing. We were a 130,000 square foot under roof machine shop. Got to do a lot of stuff in the manufacturing sector as well. So I've seen a lot of different areas, including healthcare and things. What bothered me is lately, the manufacturing sectors, the healthcare sectors, and the state and city municipalities have been absolutely hammered by bad guys with ransomware. Anyone here, raise your hand if you have either suffered or been a target of a ransomware attack, right? Okay. It's been pretty significant, especially in these specific sectors. The reason behind that is they know that people that need their data are going to pay, right? Doctor can't go perform surgery or do much of anything on a patient if they can't get to the patient records. So they need that back quickly. They'll pay. Cities, states, municipalities, right? Any of you seen some of the stories that are going on here? Many a city and state has been, well, mostly cities and municipalities have been knocked back to the dark ages where they end up doing all of their paperwork on paper, right? How many of us are prepared to continue our businesses when we're knocked back to the days of pen and paper, right? These are cities and states booking people in and out of jail on paper. What could possibly go wrong, right? It was bad enough when I checked out of the hotel this morning, their system was down. It can be a horrible, horrible thing when an entire city is down. We saw this with Atlanta. We've seen this with Sarasota, down where we're from. It's a mess, right? So this just continues to happen on these things. And again, most of these are caused through human failure. So, note before, we do security awareness training and simulated phishing. As Chris mentioned, we do that kind of simulated phishing emails that he sends out to the people. It's a form of training. We're going to talk about that in the second session, how that ties into things. I will tell you right now, this is not a sales pitch. My goal is really to educate you. And saying that, I want you all to raise your hand if you have questions. I know it's always tough to be the first one to raise their hand, but if you want to share something that's happened with you that'll benefit the other folks in this room, that would be fantastic. If you have questions that you don't understand, that would be fantastic as well. Please don't be shy. That's what I'm saying here. So getting into it, I have to start with this. This is a fairly new book, Art of War by a guy named Sun Tzu. This is old. And it's interesting, though, that all the way back there, all warfare is based on deception. Now, it's interesting because within the security community, sometimes we have little squabbles about certain things. And when we talk about these sorts of attacks, people have a problem sometimes with the term warfare. But I'll tell you, I really believe this is a warfare situation. Again, not the kids in the basement, right? This is organized crime. We have nation states. We have terrorist groups pulling off these attacks to fund their other horrible things that they're doing. This is how the funding happens for a lot of these places, and it's pretty significant. So, when it comes to deception, our brain's job is to filter, interpret, and present reality. Now, some people have a hard time thinking about this. Everything you taste, everything you smell, everything you feel, everything you see, all of that must be real, right? This is reality. However, in the last couple of years, we've actually had some pretty interesting things that have challenged that. For example, right? Anyone remember what color the dress is? Okay. So this amazes me because there's some physical characteristics that come into play here. There's some other things that come into play. But, you know, my wife and I are sitting there looking at the same monitor, and I'm telling her it's blue and black, and she's like, no, it's white and gold. I'd like to point out, since she's not here, that I was right. But this is different people, and you are so sure that what you're seeing is real, it makes no sense to you to see the other side of it, right? It's like the audio clip, Yanni or Laurel. Do we remember that? Has everyone in here heard that one before? Anyone not? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. The trick to this audio file is you either hear Yanni or Laurel. And again, some of that is physical characteristics, the frequencies that our eardrums work at, some of this is other things. But what's fascinating to me about this is both of those audio clips are in the same thing. They're actually both there. But our brains hear one of them and completely filter the other one out. Now you can work really hard and eventually kind of peel it apart and hear the other one if you try really hard most of the time, especially if somebody has made that part stand out. But both of those sounds are in there. And once you hear one of them, your brain shuts out the other one. Okay? So reality can be messed with. Things we think are real, just because we see them, taste them, hear them, doesn't necessarily mean they are. And this is accomplished a lot of times through emotions, through all kinds of ways to manipulate what is your reality. So we have to understand it. We have to understand we're not fallible, or we're not infallible. We are fallible people. And just because we see something doesn't necessarily mean it's real. So the OODA loop is a pretty interesting thing, right? So has anyone here heard of the OODA loop before? Okay, we've got a couple of hands on that. All right, this is kind of cool. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about this, because I just love saying it. The CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. It's hard not to say without the voice, right? This is an interesting document that fascinates me too, because it's all about trying to manipulate things. Now, this is a case, I used to be a smoker. Years ago, I did quit, but this, I can totally understand this being a smoker, right? So the idea here is you want to put something in somebody's drink. So, this is about focus redirection. What they're basically doing is they're showing that you light this person's cigarette, and while you're doing that, they're dropping something in the drink. Now, I can tell you, as an ex-smoker, having received a light from other people before, when somebody holds a ball of fire in front of my face, my focus is pretty much on the end of that cigarette and that ball of fire, trying not to burn my eyebrows off, right? It is a remarkably powerful way to redirect focus. You could pretty much remove the table underneath me and I would have no idea what's going on, because I'm trying not to catch on fire, all right? This is another sort of example of how to do this. This is redirecting the focus in one place while doing other things. It's interesting how much this bypasses critical thinking pieces that we normally apply. If you can get your focus on one thing, you can bypass a lot of the critical thinking. It's kind of like this too. So let's imagine you want to talk about something that's company sensitive. You go into a coffee shop, for example, sit down and you're looking around. Your mind is automatically looking around and it's assessing threats around you, okay? And it's going to look at the person on the left there, who looks like they're awake, they're put together. Your mind is automatically going to think, okay, this person is alert and maybe listening to me, if you're concerned about that. The person on the other side, though, looks like they've had a bad day, they've been run over by a truck or two, they've had a rough time. They don't look like they're going to be paying any attention. Your brain automatically puts it down as not a threat, okay? This is all visual stuff, again, tricking the reality piece of things. One thing I will say about this is, because we're so conditioned to look at this where the alert person is a threat, this is going to be the end of most of us in the zombie apocalypse, okay? This is absolutely flipped. But this, again, is another way to prevent certain things that are going to mess with your mind. You're going to mess with your critical thinking pieces of things by triggering part of your brain's way to work at problems and look at problems, okay? Now, spies, musicians, pickpockets, con artists, and cyber criminals are all use the principles we're about to discuss. True story, I was at a conference in Kansas City and there was a magician guy there. And has anyone ever worked with like a magician, like had them perform stunts on them? It's pretty amazing. This guy, what he did is he stood in front of me and he started chatting with me, did some things. Ended up having a foam rubber ball, right? He's like, okay, did his things, bam. Next thing I know, he pulls a foam rubber ball out of the inside of my arm, like out of the crook of my elbow. I was like, where did that come from? Okay, it was amazing. But the tricks they use are things like tapping you on the shoulder, doing things like that. I actually just worked with Apollo Robbins last week. He's a guy who's been on a couple of different things. He's also a pickpocket. But what was interesting about these deception techniques and these techniques to redirect your focus is, once I was aware of the attack, like I had this guy redo this one with a foam rubber ball. Once I was aware that he was going to do it, I could tell the point that he put it in my arm, held my arm up, and then tapped my other side. I could tell the attack was coming because now I was aware that I was being attacked. But until the point that I was aware I was being attacked at him, he could have done anything. This is a guy who pulls watches off. Amazingly enough, and I thought this would be very tough, If you're not wearing a watch, you would put a watch on you. Now, who thinks that somebody can put something on you that you don't have and you don't notice it, right? You think that you would go from nothing to having something on your wrist, you would notice it. These folks use these kind of techniques, and it's all about redirecting. It's all about getting past those things and getting your focus moved. So the OODA loop, this is a model for decision making. It was actually designed for aviation warfare. It's kind of how our minds think. If you look at this picture, if you look at the visor there, this gentleman here is a couple of feet away from an airplane. They're flying in formation here. They're very, very close to each other. When you're making decisions in such a high-paced, high-speed sort of area, they have to be very precise and very purposeful moves that you make when you're flying a couple of feet from other people. I've never done that myself, but I can imagine these things, right? Very purposeful in what you're doing. So this is where the OODA loop kind of comes in. The OODA loop is 4 steps. Observe, orient, decide, and act. This again was designed by a guy named John Boyd. And the way it basically works is you kind of observe the situation, see what's going on, right? And then you orient yourself, or this has been actually ported over to be used in business models as well. You look at where am I now, so you orient yourself, and where do I want to be? Okay? So that's the second step of orient. The third step is decide. So now what am I going to do about it? So if I'm standing here, and I need to be over here, what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to take a step to my right. Okay, now I act, and I take that step. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into that loop. I'm going to go, okay, this stuff's around me. Where am I? Okay, I'm here. I wanted to be another 2 inches over here. So now I'm going to decide to take a small step to adjust, etc., etc. You see how that just kind of runs through, right? Now what's interesting about the OODA loop is the first about 3 steps of this are critical thinking steps. These are places where our brain is actually doing some critical thinking. It's looking around at these situations and you're actually making decisions. The 4th step is doing the action. Now, what the bad guys want to do is they want to skip those first 3 steps and they want to drive you into action. They want a knee-jerk reaction. Like John Boyd said here, in order to win, we need to operate at a faster tempo or rhythm than our adversaries, or better yet, get inside the adversary's OODA loop. Such activity will make us appear ambiguous or unpredictable, thereby generate confusion and disorder among our adversaries. So if you can get inside, you can break up some of that critical thinking piece, you now become, it now becomes very hard to figure out what that person is doing, okay, by breaking out one of these pieces. And that's a key to what happens here. That's a key to what these bad guys are doing. And I will tell you that, generally speaking, the way that they do this, the way they break into those places, is through emotions. It's generally through emotions. Getting people upset, angry, annoyed, irritated. Those are the key things that drive into that. So, how do they do that? Well, let's start with this. Anyone seen the show before? It's called Mr. Robot. Okay. It's actually a very good show. It's on USA. I will tell you this. It's based on hacking. It's a very much hacker show. It's not one you want to cuddle up with the kids and watch in the evening. It's more of a raw kind of show. But it's fascinating to me because this is a show that within the hacker community was very, very popular because it actually uses real attacks. Now, for those of you that don't know, CSI Cyber, when they sit down in a chair and they flail around with their hands a few times and then the hacker voice saying, I'm in. That's not really how you break into an organization, okay? You don't punch through firewalls like that in 22 seconds flat or however long they need to fill up in the, in the script there. This is not how these things happen. Now this show is actually, all the tools that they use are legitimate tools. All of the attacks they do are legitimate attacks, okay? That's why it's actually so popular in there. But it's amazing. This is kind of the main character here, Elliot Alderson, and I love this. I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them, watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. This is very true. Every year at a couple of the conferences, the major conferences around the country, including DEF CON, which is one of the big hacker conferences in Vegas, A group puts on something called the social engineering to capture the flag. The idea here is people get points for collecting information about an organization over the phone. So they get a little time to research the company, figure out some phone numbers. Last year, the targets were in the transportation industry. And then what they do is they put a soundproof booth on stage with about 400, maybe 450 people in this room. There's microphones inside so you can hear what the person inside is saying in these conversations. Now, they have permission to do these red team tests. It's penetration testing, basically, over the phone. They just do it live. So they'll start calling these people. And again, they get points for information that they get from them. But a lot of times, they'll spend the first 30 seconds to a minute figuring out how they're going to try to get information out of this person. And a lot of that is just through human interaction. So they're going to try something that may feel a little aggressive and see how that person reacts to an aggressive push. Some people, when somebody is aggressive with them, they back away. They go, okay. They want to avoid confrontation. There are other people that will push back if somebody gets aggressive with them over the phone, right? There are some people that really fall for the helpfulness piece of things. And so they'll try to do that, and they're remarkably good at picking these vulnerabilities. So they'll call up a place. One of the ones last year was truck stops. So they called up and they said, okay, hey, this is Bob. I'm over at this other terminal. We're having a heck of a time with our internet. The drivers can't get on the internet. They're all upset. We don't know what's going on. I'm calling to see if you guys can get on the internet. Are you having problems with internet too? And the person's like, well, no, we're fine over here. Okay, well, you know how upset drivers can get, and you know, they're going, yeah, okay, well, you know, we were wondering, maybe it's our antivirus that's doing it. So like, you know, down in the corner by your clock, do you have a little yellow shield down there? Okay, yeah, if you hover it, does it say Symantec? Okay, so you have Symantec antivirus. That's the same one we're using. Okay, so maybe it's not that. Well, what version of Windows are you using? What type of PC are you using? Et cetera, et cetera. And they start pulling this information out of these people just by talking to them on the phone. Now they know your organization's type of PC. Oh, you run Dell Optiplexes. Oh, you run, you know, this antivirus. Oh, you use Chrome browser only. Well, if I'm an attacker, this is all incredibly great information for us. But it's all done by exploiting human vulnerability and weaknesses. It gets them not thinking about, this is kind of weird that somebody would just call me and ask me these questions, the critical thinking pieces. And because they want to be helpful, they start driving down that road and giving up a lot of information. Okay? This is a very common type of attack to get information out of people. And a lot of times they don't even, it doesn't even feel bad. In the end, they're going, oh, thank you so much. Look, we got our internet back up. You helped me. And they hang up, and the person never thinks that they were just involved in pulling all of this information. I've seen them find out what kind of badges people have, like getting into doors. So if I know that you use HID badges, I can now build a cloner for your HID badges. I know exactly what to do. I've seen a lot of incredible information pulled out of people through these sorts of attacks. People have vulnerabilities, and it doesn't take much to see what they are. So the ideal situation for an attacker is to hijack that OODA loop and drive them straight towards action. When it comes to phishing emails, I'm going to go through some examples here. This is one of the ones we had last year, went out to a lot of different colleges. This is an example of an actual one here. Hello all, an emergency scare earlier on campus. Kindly go through the memo release and please follow the outline protocol. They had done a little bit of research here and they figured out that that college used Microsoft for their email. And so they sent them to a login page for Microsoft, looked like Microsoft. And they grabbed credentials doing this. Now that's one of the most dangerous things you can do in an organization is give up your credentials. Once they can do that, they can get in your email box, they can use it to launch all kinds of attacks that make it very, very hard for the recipient on the other side to see because it's coming from a legitimate email account that may or may not have already had legitimate communications. So they'll pick up in conversations you already have. It's very, very dangerous to give up your credentials. All right? This one was done like that. The idea here is it triggered people's fear. It made them upset. It made them angry. I'll tell you, the bad guys don't care if you're mad about the email that comes out. They want that. Phishing emails like this, the business email compromise ones, are very, very tricky. Anyone here either receive or fall victim to gift card scams? Talk about that a little bit. Only one, that's surprising. Okay. We're seeing a lot of this. Now, the key to these is they tend to be very, very focused. They're very, very targeted. They generally don't have a payload. In other words, they don't have an attachment that technology catches. It's very hard for these filters to find things when they don't have an infected file. They don't link to anything nasty. These are totally designed to be the CEO or executive saying, I need you to send money. I need you to wire payment to. I need you to go buy these gift cards. These are all human attacks, not technical attacks. And the fact is, this is one of the key ways that this is going on. And frankly, as good as technology is, it is very, very poor at catching these attacks, which is why the numbers are up very significantly on this. We see this in invoice redirection. Okay? We see this in escrow redirection. Okay? So imagine this. I was speaking earlier this year, no, last year. I had the privilege of being able to brief, it was 6 of the different House subcommittees in D.C. One of them was finance and terrorism. And while I was in with this, the members of this subcommittee, one of the guys wouldn't give us a business card. He kind of stayed very quiet, listened to the talk, and we discussed the different things that are going on. And at the end of the talk, he pulled me aside afterwards and he introduced himself. He said he was with the Secret Service, which was all the secrecy stuff. I was like, this is so cool. Right? You know, feel very James Bond or Jason Bourne there. Anyways, so he said, you know, I just got done working a case like what you described. He said that this was a commercial real estate venture. Basically, I think it was the title company ended up giving up their email credentials. Someone got into their email then, and what they did is they sat there and they watched emails go back and forth. When it was time to make a funds transfer, dealing with this this particular deal, the attackers popped up. They sent the email. The attackers popped up out of the same email account because they were in there for a couple of months unnoticed. They fired off the email to the folks and said, oh, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong account number. Wire it to this instead. $500,000 went sideways. Now, they were fortunate that it went to HSBC in Hong Kong, which has been under a lot of scrutiny about some of these sorts of things. A lot of the transfers go to Hong Kong. So they held the funds for a little bit. They still managed to get $40,000 out before things got locked up. But that was an easy $500,000 on the side. We see that a lot in real estate. We see it in not only commercial real estate, but if you yourself is going to buy a home, we're seeing it where they will try to get into one of these title companies or one of those organizations, and they will send it to the consumer and get them to send $9, $10, $20, $30,000 out, and you have lost it. These, again, are all designed to work on the human vulnerability. This one is trust a lot of times, or there's generally a sense of urgency. You know, we need to get this in today, or we're not going to be able to close on time. I need you to do this right now. Such and such happened. There's usually a reason behind it. I need you to do it right now. So a lot of places actually these days are starting to build in things in the beginning of the process when you're already signing the stack of papers to start a home loan that says, this is the only account we will be transferring money to and from. There will be no exceptions. And if you do it, you're done. You lose that money. Imagine saving up for a good chunk of your life for a down payment, and some scammer gets it shot out the side of the road. This is happening to individuals as well as companies. But the key is, again, pretty much none of these have any of these attachments or viruses or malware or any of that stuff with them. This is all about manipulating the human piece. W-2 fraud happens every year, about the first quarter. This is tied in with the tax scams that happen so often. Basically what they do is they pretend to be an executive in your organization. They send an email out and says, hey, I need you to send me all of the W-2s for the employees. They do that, they send it out. Then the bad guys file the taxes on behalf of all of your employees. Believe it or not, every single one of your employees gets a refund that year. Pretty Pretty amazing how that worked, right? The bad guys take off with the money, then the employees go to actually file their own taxes for real and find out it's already been done for them. That kicks off a pretty nasty, long-running special time with the IRS. Anyone here like to spend special time with the IRS? Most people say no, right? Anyone here ever have something like this happen to them? Well, okay. It usually takes about a year or so to actually get your refund once this happens. They'll give you alternative ID numbers and PIN numbers, et cetera, et cetera. As an organization, how do you think this fits into employee morale when you've given out all of their information that's going to hit them for a while, right? This is another type of scam. Invoice phishes, PO phishes, this stuff happens all the time as well. Sometimes it'll just be a fake email or phishing deal. There was a guy who started a company overseas that was close to the name of a company that did a lot of work for Google and or Facebook. He had a couple of them going. 48-year-old Lithuanian guy got $100 million by just sending fake invoices to Google and Facebook. Now, you would think that these are companies that are large enough and mature enough to see these sorts of attacks coming, right? You think that they are possibly more mature and better at spotting these than your organization. But if they can get away with $100 million from that, from those groups, imagine what they can do to a smaller organization for 5,000, 10,000, small numbers. It doesn't have to be huge numbers. But these are folks that do have processes in place. So these can be very, very ugly. Now, on the flip side, imagine one of your employees in payroll or in accounts payable or receivable clicks an email, goes to a link, puts in their credential, and ends up giving their login information to the bad guys. The bad guys go into your email account and start sending fake invoices to your employer, or to your vendors, or to your customer, right? This is the other flip side that happens with that. So then, all of a sudden, your company is getting people to send money out. That's not a very good vendor or customer relation thing, right? You're taking their money. So this is another thing that happens. It's similar to this in the invoices. So they'll send fake ones. They'll actually jump in sometimes on some of the larger ones where an invoice is due. If they're in the email account, they'll pick up on an email thread and do basically the same thing as the escrow one, where they say, oh, I need you to pay this invoice, but send it to this account instead. Boom, the money goes there. Because they're in the account, they can filter the emails that come back through. And next thing you know, nobody realizes that this has happened until they hit net 30, net 60. Whenever you start looking at your unpaid invoices and you reach back out to them and go, hey, you never paid me this. They're going, yeah, I did. And here's the email to prove. Okay? So by that time, the bad guys, they're in the Bahamas enjoying their vacation. You are not. Package or parcel delivery fish. Again, like the Amazon ones, right? We all receive stuff like this. What's interesting about these is there are tells to most of these things, right? It's kind of hard to see on here, I think. But if you look up there by the name, it's FedEx. And the actual email address it's coming from is test1@merchminer.com. Folks, FedEx has their own domain, okay? If you see things like that, see, there's always tells, there's always ways to spot these sorts of things in there, especially if it's not coming from a legitimately compromised account. So these, though, are designed to get in there in the mix of other emails that we're used to seeing. They ride the coattails on things that are expected, so we don't apply the critical thinking to them, just like the invoices, just like some of those other ones like that. These are designed, again, to bypass the OODA loop because we're kind of numb to these. We see these all the time. Okay, got another one, click on it, see where it's at, what it's going to be. Well, now you click on it, you log into your Amazon account, and you've really given them your account credentials, so now they can go into Amazon and order a bunch of stuff, and you'll never see it, right? Or by the time they get it and they take it off, it's way too late. Same sort of thing again here. Gift card scams. This is a hot topic. This has been going on pretty significantly lately, and basically it boils down to the email that come out from somebody, an executive a lot of times, and there's a lot of pretext to this. The pretext is kind of the story behind it. So the pretext to this may be, I've seen it where it's like, oh, we're going to do an employee appreciation thing. I need you to go down to the store. I need you to get 10 $100 Apple iTunes gift cards. And we're going to give those out to our best employees. And since you're one of our best employees, you get to keep one too. But the rest, send me the codes, right? So they're working on the psychology here to make them feel good about it. You get to keep one too, because you're an awesome employee, right? Who wants to disappoint the boss after they've just told you that you're an awesome employee, you're going to get $100? So they run on down there, they buy these gift cards. There's usually urgency. It's usually, I need you to scratch these off and send it to me right away. I've got to get them to the customers right away, or I've got to get them to the employees right away, or we're doing something that's on. It's always an urgency, right? But we're seeing this happen more and more. And I have a personal story here. Just about 2 weeks ago, we're actually doing something alongside with a university that we're sponsoring. And sure enough, I get an email from my boss that says, I'm about to get on a plane. I need to get these gift cards to these folks so that they can help with this sponsorship thing. I need you to run down to Starbucks and get like 20 $10 gift cards. And she said, I'm going to be unavailable for a little while. And it popped in my head, this is the exact script for a real gift card scam. I said, I'm not doing it until I talk to you. Because this is exactly how they work. But what was interesting to me is I've always looked at these and been like, yeah, it does that. And then bam, flat on my lap, is this was a real one, and we were really getting these gift cards to thank the people that were. I think what makes them so effective is they mix in with the things that we're used to seeing. Now, the gift card thing, it does always bust me up. It's kind of like the tax fraud, right? How many here have heard of the people calling, hey, this is the IRS, you need to pay me or you're going to get arrested, right? It happens to people at home, happens to people at work, right? And you would think that people would realize when the IRS says, I need you to go get a bunch of iTunes gift cards, that something's amiss, right? I don't know that I've ever paid back taxes in an iTunes gift card. Okay, you think, the IRS agents are over there with all the music in the world and the coolest apps because they got all these gift cards, right? But here's the deal. And I used to kind of think, you have to be really foolish to fall for that. But here's an example somebody gave me. They had somebody in their organization that was a recent immigrant. They had recently moved here. They had gotten their citizenship. They were from a country that the government was a little bit more heavy-handed than we are here. They don't know. They're predisposed to be afraid of their government because of where they came from. So when the government calls and says, you need to pay me or I'm going to come get you, it's real for them. Their emotions get spun up, and those critical thinking pieces that we have go right out the door. And so we can stand back and we can criticize people that fall for these things because we're not in the middle of the emotional battle that's going on. I'll tell you this, these scams don't continue to happen because they don't work. They happen because they work. And again, there's fear, there's anger, there's outrage, there's urgency, there's helpfulness. All of these things happen. Payroll redirection, I talked about, different kinds of things. This is one that we're seeing where the executive will end up calling in or send an email, the executive, to someone in like payroll. And they'll say something like, I had to close my old account. I need you to send my next paycheck to this account number now. So in a lot of places, the payroll department isn't going to tell the CEO, sir, ma'am, get out on the portal and do it yourself like they would a regular schlub like me, right? They're going to take care of their executive. So what do? They change where that account, where that direct deposit goes. It's usually a pretty convincing story. I'll tell you this, most executives aren't thrilled to have their paychecks redirected to some bad guy's bank account, right? But they use the authority of the executive and the fear to push back on the executive to get them to perform this action without taking those critical thinking steps, right? We've seen the same attack happen, though. Instead of redirecting their paycheck, they'll ask for their last 3 paycheck stubs. And they'll send them. Nobody's going to tell them, sir, ma'am, go out to the portal, get your own. So they send them. What can you do with 3 paycheck stubs, folks? Right? A lot of good information in there. Open accounts, take out loans, all kinds of fun stuff. All the human psychology, all messing with the people's heads, using the authority of the executive to bypass the critical thinking piece and make them afraid to push back. Tech support scams, again, we see these all the time. Here's a hint, folks. Microsoft doesn't care if your computer is infected and sending stuff out. But where this matters is in organizations. I've seen where people have maybe gone to websites they probably shouldn't go to on company time. Something like this pops up. Now these people are scared. They're afraid they're going to get fired. They're afraid they're going to lose their job if something is going on. I've actually seen stories where people have paid for ransomware recovery and threw things like this out of their own pocket instead of calling the organization's help desk because they're afraid to get in trouble. So what do? They let the bad guys in to help clean up the issue, because this is Microsoft helping them. And in the meantime, the bad guys are dropping all kinds of software and things on that, you know. They're very kind, though. They'll say, oh, you know what? I'll take care of this. You go to lunch. You go do something else. I'm remotely in your machine. I'm here to help you, right? They're looking for bank accounts. They're looking for passwords. They're looking for whatever. They're dropping whatever kinds of things on these machines. But again, in organizations, a lot of people are afraid that they're going to get in trouble for having done something that they should. So these can be a very powerful emotional trigger for people to do things. Clickbait, we've all seen these ads, right? Pretty much every news site we go to, at the bottom of these ads are on there. You know, they just wanted groceries. Nobody expected this. You won't believe what they caught the cashiers doing. There's a lot of psychology behind this. This leverages pattern interruption for the information gap theory. The Carnegie Mellon explanation is there right there. But basically, what it boils down to is they tell you a little bit of information about something you didn't know you cared about. And then they don't tell you the end of it. And now all of a sudden, you care. Okay? Back in my day, if I wanted information on something, I had to go out and I had to get on this thing called a bus. I had to go to this place called a library, right? Some of you may be familiar with these things. And then you have to flip through these cards and find the information. If you're really lucky, you get the microfiche you get to put in. It's all wee, wee, wee. You know, you get to zoom in. It's pretty neat. It feels very James Bond. But my point is, it took us a long time to get information. But these days, information is on the tips of our fingers, right away, instantly, all the time. We've been trained to expect the answers to our stuff immediately. So what they do is they create a question you didn't know you cared about, and then give you a way to go find the answer to it. The other thing that plays into this is the social aspect. Nobody wants to be, especially the younger generation, the folks that didn't get the joke, okay, that didn't understand the reference, that didn't understand the meme, because they didn't know, right? So if you give them a little information, but deny them the answer, they're disposed to go do it. The reason you see this on so many web pages is because it works. It works on our site. It makes us do these actions, okay? Bad guys have actually used these to weaponize advertisements as well. Not always, but it's definitely been used in those campaigns as well to get people to bypass that critical thinking loop. I mean, who really cares what the cashier is doing, honestly? But it makes you compelled to want to know. They'll use that to get people to click on things. I do love the bottom one. I keep this in here for my own personal laughs because 5 things you need to know about clickbait. Number 4 will blow your mind. This is a clickbait ad using clickbait as the topic. It's like Inception, right? The buildings are kind of folded in on each other. They'll do anything they can do to try to get your interest and deny you those answers. So how do we defend ourselves in our organizations? Well, first of all, we need to understand what these things are doing, what they're triggering. This is every quarter we do kind of a top click infographic, all right? And we're going to get into the training piece in the next session here quite a bit. But this gives you an idea of what people are clicking on. This is our first quarter. Look at that LinkedIn click rate. 50% click rate on LinkedIn emails that go out to people. This is through our platform. Now, what's interesting to me this year is, generally I see the surge in LinkedIn in the 4th quarter. Usually runs about the 30s, and then in the 4th quarter it usually spikes. This 4th quarter was a little low, but it picked itself up again in the 1st quarter. But usually they're high because at the end of the year, you're getting your Christmas bonuses, you're getting all of that stuff, you're starting your new year, and you start thinking, maybe I'd be interested in another job, right? What's LinkedIn for? It's about networking. So people are very likely to start clicking on these things in the 4th quarter Because they're starting to think, hey, maybe it's time for a new job. Maybe I'll consider a new job. I got my bonuses. I got all that stuff taken care of. It's a new year, right? I'm going to get that treadmill and get a new job. Even if it ends up like the treadmill where you hang your clothes on it all the time, right? What better clothing hanger is there than a treadmill? This is the human psychology going behind it. If you look at some of these other ones, right? The Facebook ones, password change, primary email change. These are designed to make you go, oh crap, I didn't change my password. I need to go in there and see what's going on. So what do? You click the link to go in and you give them the password. Which usually doesn't end well for you, right? These are designed to get your credentials. These are designed to get you to give up this information so then they can get in there and then they'll use that to start attacking other people through Messenger and things like that. Some of the things they'll do in Messenger, the top one there, your friend tagged a photo of you. So that's an interesting one, especially around holidays that are maybe on the drinking side. Company parties where people have embarrassed themselves and then they get an email that says, hey, there's a photo of you tagged. Oh. You know, and even if you didn't do something, it piques your interest. Why is somebody tagging me in this thing? What did I do? Why am I in this picture, right? People always want to know what's going on. Sometimes they're concerned about it. If you're, I don't know, a public speaker and slightly narcissistic, maybe you want to go, hey, I went around and look at that picture, right? But whatever it is, whatever kind of drives into that thing, it makes you curious and makes you want to click on these things. And that's why these are actually very, very interesting. What they'll do in a lot of those, they'll say a photo or a video is tagged. They'll send you to that thing. It's usually a fake group with another link. You follow that link and it says you need to download a codec to view the photo or the video. So now you're installing malware on your machine. Pretty powerful way of doing that. People's curiosity keeps them doing things they wouldn't normally do, right? Voice message, I mean, you get the idea here. In the wild attacks, Wells Fargo, you have secure mail, undelivered email, E-Trade action required, Microsoft Teams. If you look at these, what you'll notice is the pattern of these is a lot of them are designed to get you to give up your credentials. They're designed to get you to put in your username and password. Now here's a little trick you may or may not realize. Does anyone in this room ever reuse a password on different sites? Everybody's hand should be up. Okay, we all do this. It is one of the most dangerous actions we can take because of something called credential stuffing. And this is where the attackers will take a username and a password on a site and try it on other sites because we, as humans, tend to reuse passwords. Okay? Recently, not too long ago, there was a bit of a splash. It was a breach. They called it collection number 1. Had about 772 million email and password pairs in it, credential pairs in collection number 1. The interesting thing about it is about 22, I think it was 22 million were unique. What's that tell you? Right? There's an awful lot of password breaches going on there. And I will also tell you, if you think you're clever by having your password like shopping Amazon 1234 and then shopping Sears 1234, and you think that's going to trip them up? No, we're wise to that. We have algorithms that will do that sort of thing and switch them up to the different accounts too, and do it automatically. So changing those little things like that is not really a clever thing. But this is why getting into somebody's email account, getting their credentials and trying them on other sites, getting that sort of thing going on is a big deal. And if you look at, for example, last year Hancock Health got hit with the SamSam ransomware, took them down. They paid about $50,000 to get their stuff back up. They said they had backups, but they couldn't restore as quickly as they would have liked to. So they paid the ransom to get their data back so they could start servicing their customers again, right? They paid about $50,000 to them. The way that it happened with them was through a vendor. A vendor gave up their remote access credentials, and they turned around and used it on Hancock Health to get in through their remote access terminals. So they used a vendor to attack one of their customers. Anyone here want to be the vendor that's known for taking taking down Target, taking down Hancock, taking down something like that, right? Even if you're a small organization, you're still very much a target. And when it comes to things like ransomware, especially in the manufacturing industry, you may think, well, what data do I have that they want? They don't care about my drawings, they don't care about my CAD stuff, they don't care about this. But you do. And you are willing to pay to get it back. They may not want to sell it. But how are you going to make parts? You can't run your hospital. How are you going to make parts? You can't run your plating factory. How are you going to do this when your data is held? So don't think just because you're a small organization that it makes you not a target. Not the real target, like a target. But if you look at the way that these happen, where they leverage these other folks in there, these attacks are hot and heavy, and they're costing organizations a lot. You have to remember that part when it comes to this. Now, when you get an email, if you have an emotional response, is what I tell people, be very, very careful. It doesn't automatically mean that it is a phishing email, but if you have an emotional response to an email, step back, take a breath, refocus on the critical thinking piece. Don't let the emotions drive you straight into making an action, right? So, in this case, greed. Nigerian crit scam, anyone heard of that, right? The guy's been trying to give away money for years. That started before it was electronic. That started where they used to mail letters to people, okay? The key is, by making it electronic, they're actually able to open up their scope and hit now hundreds of thousands of people at a time instead of having to put postage stamps on everything. Can you imagine the poor guys putting the tongues are all sticky, right? Probably can't talk for a week after one of those campaigns back in the old days. But now it's just like, boom, you got a whole bunch of people. It costs you nothing to do. And if you get one out of 10,000, sweet. It doesn't cost them anything. So that's great. Curiosity, again, denying you some information, wanting you to do something because you're curious about the outcome, self-interest, right? We don't know about that. Urgency will be in just about every phishing email or social engineering attack ever made. There's always a sense of urgency. The sense of urgency is one of the key things that will trip up the critical thinking and make you drive straight to the action. It's got to be urgent. There's got to be a time frame. That's why ransomware runs some of the countdown timers sometimes, where it'll do what's called the Russian roulette and randomly just delete a file for you. Makes you feel real good, right? You're like, oh, no, not that one. Need to pay this, need to pay it now. This is all the urgency piece, right? Fear, the IRS coming to get you and arrest you if you don't pay that individual by the end of his shift in iTunes gift cards. Very scary. Very scary to some people. And helpfulness, right? Anyone ever see the email that says, well, here, let me tell you the story behind this. So while I worked for the Army, my team lead, my boss, great guy, he was very set in his ways, and a little cantankerous. He was an old Navy chief. And one day, one of our guys got a message from him, an email from him. Their personal email said, hey, this is Randy. I was traveling in the UK, I got stuck, my wallet was stolen, my passport was stolen, I have no money, I need you guys to collect some money, send it to me right away so I can get back to the US. Anyone ever see that one? Okay. Well, we got that. We were, of course, concerned for our boss's well-being, the team lead. So we did a collection of all the people on the team. I think we raised about 61 cents, which didn't thrill him, but that's what we were willing to pay to get it back. But you get the idea, this is a helpfulness thing, right? You also get the ones now where somebody calls and says, I'm the attorney for your nephew, Billy. This works well with the elderly. Billy got picked up for a DUI, and we need to keep it very hush-hush. He's really not guilty, but the cops had it in for him, whatever. They make up the story. He said to call you, and you could help pay my fees to get him out of jail and clear his name, right? The elderly may not remember Bobby. We have people with Alzheimer's and had big families, right? I don't know half of them. And they'll use that to leverage that sort of being helpful. This is going on quite a bit. We see these scams happening. We actually seen some going with the fear side. I'll do this real quick. Where people like in Southern California, here's the thing, you got the sign in the back of your car that says, Johnny is in whatever middle school, et cetera, et cetera. people can figure out stuff. So what these guys are doing now is they'll end up calling the parents and saying, little Johnny didn't make it to school. I grabbed little Johnny. You call anyone, talk to anyone, you'll never see little Johnny again, but I need $5,000, I need it in 2 hours. Or you'll never see Johnny again. You call the school, he's gone. They scare the heck out of people. They can pull together this $5 grand, they send them the money. In the meantime, Johnny's fat, dumb, and happy at school, he eats it for lunch, and nobody knows any better. Well, they gathered information on these people, and they used that to leverage it. It's terrifying. It's fear. It makes us bypass all of those critical thinking. Like, if Johnny didn't make it to school, why hasn't the office called? You know? Well, it just doesn't make sense, right? When you look at this from a distance, you go, oh, well, I can see where that's clearly a scam. But in the heat of the moment, again, it's not. So understand where you can be distracted, understand the things that can get to you. What are you prone to? What are your vulnerabilities? Like I said earlier, are you going to push back against somebody aggressive? Are you going to back away? Are you going to try to be helpful? We need to look in the mirror and understand ourselves a little bit in order to defend ourselves against ourselves. And let's be honest, all of us have vulnerabilities. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We have to be honest about that and know where we are in order to defend against it, because we all have them. So what we do is we try to teach people on the red flags. Okay? It's kind of like the emotion thing. If I get emotions, okay. But there's some key things. I don't want to try to train your users, or nobody wants to try to train your users to be technical people like us. There's too many of us technical people around as it is, quite frankly. We're a lot less fun than most of the other people. But the idea is you give them key things to look at. And, you know, this is 22 red flags, but think about this. I get an email from HR department at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and that's unusual. Maybe I ought to pay attention to this email a little bit more, right? That's what we're talking about here. It's not technical. Then what you do is you get them to report it to somebody that can take a look at things. Get it to one of your technical people. Don't expect them, don't try to make them technical. Accounting has accounting to do, marketing has marketing to do. They don't need to be people that are trying to look at email headers and stuff. That's one of the key problems I see that us as technical people try to do, is get them to understand those pieces that really they don't need to. And this PDF is available on our website, by the way. We actually have this printed and put in our cubes all around our office. It's just great to have something for a quick reference. So, that being said, the training does work. And as Chris mentioned, they were at 27% when they first started, which is the overall average. This is 6 million people, 11,000 organizations. We'll break this down a little bit more. Training people within 90 days dropped down to about 13% click rate at the end of a year. On average, these 6 million people were down to 2.17%. And something Chris said too is, he's down to 8%. He's using the right way to do this, and we'll talk about this next time. You incrementally make them tougher. So this 2% click rate on average at the end of the year was actually on tougher emails than the 27% they were initially clicking on. It's never going to solve it. People are going to get mixed up. Things are going to be going on. It's going to be end of month, and your accounts payable or accounts receivable folks are running around like crazy, and something is going to fall in there. That's why you have to have a layered approach. We never say that training people is the solution, but it is definitely a way to help manage the problem. If you have security controls that are failing 27% of the time, you're going to do something to fix that, right? We just tend to forget about people when we're putting that stuff. I get to work with some fantastically intelligent people. One of my cohorts at KnowBe4, his name is Roger Grimes, and he wrote a book called DataDriven Defense. It's a fantastic book, and I'm not saying this just because he sits with me. I love the fact that it gives you a different way to look at your defense in your organizations based on what's actually your problem. Where far too often we run down the road and we build a defense based on what everyone else is doing, when that may not actually be our key problem. Far too often we spend a lot of time and effort patching certain things when, you know, we patch 99%, but the 1% we didn't patch is Oracle Java, right? Yeah, we all know what that means, okay? So it's a fascinating thing when it comes to this. I also get to work a lot with a guy named Perry Carpenter, who also just wrote a book. And he is amazing in his understanding of getting humans to perform certain behaviors. A lot of what you're going to see in this presentation here is stuff that I've learned from Perry. It's fascinating how this works. Now, we just was just having a discussion over here with this young lady, and one of the things that we have as security folks and IT folks is we generally tend to be technical. We tend to be highly technical. We oftentimes don't really like people. Okay? Now, over the years, what we found is that obviously we're understanding this, that people are the problem. Okay? People are a big problem. People are causing us a lot of problems. So what do? We turn around and we say, okay, you technical person that doesn't like people, we're going to have you train people. Okay? Y'all see where this is leading. Okay? This is not always the best way to do this. This is not where we're comfortable. It's not where we're at. And like I mentioned to this young lady, how many of us have ever either answered a job or put out a job request or a job rec that says something like, and you get to train people, right? Does that drive people in IT to come in and be like, yes, I want to do this. This is great. I get to deal with humans. No. I'm at 2 o'clock in the morning working on a machine with the headphones on. Like I'm your typical absolute geek when it comes to that side of things. But I had to force myself years ago to start dealing with the human problem because I recognized how many of my issues were keeping me working the weekends instead of playing video games. Okay, so I said, this has got to change, right? So I started attacking the situation a little bit differently and started focusing on the people things. And what I found in my experience is it greatly reduced things like malware tickets. You know, things that I would have to go out and reload a machine for. The old FDIS format reinstall, right? Everyone knows that song, right? That's never fun on a Friday afternoon, or Saturday, or Sunday. And I found that by working with the human side of things, that we could make a difference, and it actually affected me in a positive way. So I've learned a lot of things over the years, and then working with these tremendous coworkers that help me focus in on some other things too, and learn a lot of stuff is kind of what brought this type of a talk together. I think that a lot of times we talk about these issues, we talk about, well, you need to train people. Well, that's fantastic that you need to do this, but nobody ever gives us the tips and tricks about how to actually get people to pay attention. And if it doesn't come naturally to us, we need a little help. So that's the idea behind this presentation here, is to help you understand how training is evolving, how it's happening. Now, do I have any CISSPs in here? Okay, got a couple here. I worked for the company that does that, ISC Squared, for a number of years. One of my dear friends there, he was one of the security guys. He did the training for our company, and I love the guy Chuck to death. God, I just named off him too. Jeez. If y'all see this guy named Chuck, don't tell him I said this. Fantastic guy, incredibly smart. He did our awareness training and tried to demonstrate things like a Wi-Fi pineapple, which is a man-in-the-middle attack on Wi-Fi and stuff. And frankly, I was bored. And I'm a technical person. The people that were not technical were like trying to find a way, you know, if you can imagine a coyote wanted to chew his leg off to get out of the trap, this is kind of what they were looking for. They're like trying to knock over empty coffee cups, like, please, something spills so I can leave. We've got to get around that. We've got to get past that. We've got to get that. But again, technical people training non-technical people can be a nightmare. So, about that, you already heard about me, you know, who I am, where we're from, although that has fancier slide-ins, right? Did you like that? So the numbers behind phishing. This is the first thing I like to bring up in this because a lot of people, they hear about these things, but they don't understand the sheer volume and the damage being done these days by phishing. We hear about it, we see it, we go, okay, yeah, no big deal, you know, a couple bucks here or there. But here's the deal, it is significant, the losses that are going on. Successful data breaches, 91% started with a spear phishing attack. This is malicious data breaches. Again, the actual breaches themselves, not just gathering information like the 98% statistic, but 91% of actual malicious data breaches start with a spear phishing attack. Whether it's getting into your email accounts, whether it's getting an action to happen or whatever. It's a significant thing. It is the biggest way that organizations are being breached these days. Now, spear phishing also has the associated phone calls. So phishing, it's called voice phishing, or smishing, which is SMS phishing or text message phishing. Or how about this? Hybrids of those. So the attacker sends an email, doesn't get a response in a couple of minutes, now sends a text message, says, I sent you an email, I need you to take a look at this right now, sign your CEO. Now, a couple of things happen there. People don't expect an out-of-band message to come as well. So they go, this must be legitimate if I'm getting a text message. And they're scared because the CEO just texted them and said, what are you doing not reading my email? Right? Again, we drive into what we did last time. These sorts of attacks, again, are how the people are getting in there. Ransomware, big deal. I'll have another slide on that. Spear phishing emails were used by 71% of attack groups in 2017. I'm looking forward to the 2018 numbers on this. And in March of 2018, 1 in every 484 emails to organizations, what we call a mid-size 251 to 500 employees, had malware. 1 in 484. Think about how many emails come into your organization every day. Please. What's the percentage of people getting caught? Yeah, the people that are doing these attacks. Always an interesting question. The problem is, and it does happen on occasion, there was one called Operation Wire not too long ago, went after CEO fraud. They netted like 74 people, stopped 14 million in transfers, and pulled back. They ended up with like $2.5 million in cash. This was done by State Department and a lot of the multi-letter agencies floating around, right? That was the most noticeable one or most notable one that I'm aware of. But honestly, it only caught 74 people, which is nothing. The problem with this is a lot of times we know who the attack groups are. We know who Samsam is, a couple of Iranian guys. How effective do you think extraditing out of Iran is? All right? It don't happen. Same with Eastern European. This is where a lot of this stuff happens. You have a lot of very intelligent people in the Eastern European areas. They're technically smart and savvy, but there's no industry for them to put those brains to work. We see this in India as well. Very intelligent people who actually have very good training, but there are no jobs for them to do. So what happens is they take up these areas where they're actually like office buildings, literally office buildings. These people go to work, they hang around at the cooler and talk about Game of Thrones just like we do, right? And that's their job. But because we can't extradite, or because their governments are so corrupt, they know a month in advance if somebody's starting to look their way really sharp. So by the time you show up and can actually get through the paperwork, they paid off enough people that you show up to an empty building. And so that's the problem, is we actually know who a lot of these people are, but we can't do anything about it. On occasion, they'll catch somebody going on vacation and stop by a US-friendly country and pick them up at the airport. That's happened once or twice. But frankly, it doesn't happen that much. So that's the unfortunate part, is these people, it's with impunity. The other thing that you got to understand about these kind of attacks is these folks, oftentimes, their culture does not see what they're doing as wrong. Okay? If you've ever done cultural studies and things like that, there are some areas where, or some cultures where, if you pay a lot of money for something, we feel ripped off, and they're like, you're just a bad negotiator. I just sold it to you for half the price. It's your fault for not negotiating. That's the mentality. That's the thought process. In a lot of these countries, they go, they think as Americans, we're filthy rich, all of us. It's not going to hurt us to lose a couple $100 or $1,000. No big deal. We're taking money baths all day long. This is their mentality. They are not. Therefore, if we're dumb enough to fall for it, that's our own fault, not their fault for trying. So culturally, it's even acceptable in a lot of these places, which is why we continue to have numbers like this. So, yeah, it's an interesting facet to the whole attack landscape there. Sorry, we went down a little bunny trail there. I think it was entertaining and informative for some people too, though, because that is one of the biggest questions that I get. So again, back to this, 1 in 484 emails. This is the Symantec number, same with the spear phishing group. It's phenomenal if you think about the number of emails that go out every day, how many of them are laced with malware. And malware, frankly, a lot of malware is stopped by email gateways. They do a pretty good job of stopping these mass attacks. You have to have those things in place. If you're not doing email filtering right now, you have absolutely opened yourself up to a whole nother level of issues. Again, this is all layers, right? But the problem is, again, even best of breed passes about 10 or 15% through, which can still be a pretty significant number. And again, a lot of them, like before, don't have the attachments to trigger that. So crypto miners, anyone here heard of that? Right? We all know about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. One of the trends that has kind of been tapering off now a little bit, although it ebbs and flows, has been the bad guys will not only hit you up with ransomware or some other kind of Trojan, but they'll actually hit you with this thing that mines cryptocurrency. In other words, it generates money for them using your hardware. So these people would build these crypto mining rigs, spend a lot of money on this. What had happened is it would sometimes take more power through either the power to run the machine or heating and cooling, or well, cooling is the important things on these. But it would cost more money than you would generate in cryptocurrency, right? So that's what held people back by the time you buy the hardware and stuff. But what if I take and I leverage every one of your workstations in the evenings to run around and go crypto, generating currency for me? That's what crypto miners do. They use your resources, your CPU, your GPU, your power, your cooling, all of that stuff to generate money for them. So some of the stats we saw last year, 2715 file-based detections. This is file-based. This is not ones that just run in memory. Like if you go to some websites, they've been known to do that in a JavaScript. But file-based detections were up 8,500%. You have new kinds of malware. XBash, this is fantastic as far as I'm concerned, whoever wrote this, and in a horrible way. Okay, I'm not condoning this, but it's ransomware and botnet if it runs on a Linux machine. But it was a crypto miner and a worm on Windows. It would spread itself. Same piece of software would run on both Linux and Windows. Think about that, folks. And it would run differently. The reason I keep this up there is these folks are very, very intelligent and good at what they're doing. Now, what you'll see is sometimes, again, they will start a ransomware infection and install this other piece of software somewhere else, and it's running over here while you're running around with things on fire. Okay? Ransomware is an attack that is very in your face. It pops up and says, you're going to start losing files, you need to pay us. Remember I talked about focus direction? Your focus is all on that. We've seen that paired as basically a trash can fire to get everyone focused around that area there, and they start doing some very, very sharp spear phishing on executives while the whole security staff is trying to deal with the ransomware problem. They tie these things together. And then a lot of times they'll get in and they'll leave the crypto mining stuff there until you figure it out and see it. There's a term out there called dwell time. And basically this is how long the bad guys are in your system. And it is terrifyingly long, how long the average people are in your systems. I don't remember what the exact new stats are on this, but I've seen almost a year where people are in the systems before they're detected. So it can get pretty ugly, pretty bad. So it's important to know that there are other sorts of attacks out there as well. And of course, ransomware, and everyone said ransomware died. Let me tell you something. Ransomware is not dead, especially in the manufacturing sectors, like I mentioned, healthcare, and city, state, municipality. It is far from dead. The difference is, we're not seeing the big things like we saw with WannaCry. WannaCry made the front page of every newspaper around, made CNN, made Fox News, because it was so new, and how it spread, how quickly it spread, and how it took down the NHS. It was new, it was scary. I happened to have a ransomware talk on the day WannaCry happened. You can imagine how well attended that was, right? But since then, there hasn't been anything that's been breaking like that. The reason is, it's just working the way it is. So that's why we don't see it in the news. It's not that it isn't happening. It's that it's not newsworthy. Now we've seen some big ones, right? We've seen North Hydro. They supply a lot of aluminum. I think it's out of the Netherlands. It's like the #2 supplier of aluminum in the world. Their production lines got shut down by ransomware. Last I heard, they were talking about a $40 million bill revolving around that, right? This is big. This is real big. Companies, cities, states, again, all over the place losing money. You know, if you look at Atlanta, Atlanta got hit. They were hit by, I think it was SAM again. Typically speaking, they look at the $40,000, $50,000 range for ransoms. Atlanta decided not to pay the ransom, but they're up to about a $20 million bill in recovery at this point. I appreciate that they didn't pay the ransom, and there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to pay the ransom, because when you get the files back, who really knows what else has gone on with those files, honestly. But it's been brutalizing a lot of these places. As a matter of fact, there was a place, Cockrell Police Department in Texas, I think it was. They got hit by ransomware, and it was ironic because the city manager, his quote in the paper was, well, at least the clocks still work. That was like the only thing left that was still functioning in their police department. They were doing the bookings in and out of jail. I've seen that 3 or 4 times. The landline phones were down, but 911 dispatching computers were down. How confident do you feel if people are dispatching 911 calls by pen and paper, right? What could possibly go wrong with that, right? These things are pretty ugly. And yes, there are malware for cell phones as well. They've been trying to get a hook on that, but so far it's been more difficult for them, but it's not the lack of trying. There's been some interesting things happen there where they've gotten people to actually give it the permissions to do the things it wants to do. So that's one of the other attacks. Again, business email compromise, $12.5 billion in damages between October 2013 and May of 2018. And between December 2016 and May of 2018, it was a 136% increase in losses. This is this wire transfer fraud stuff. This is CEO fraud. This is that sort of thing. This is huge, $12.5 billion. We're talking about big, big numbers here. And the thing that isn't accounted for in a lot of these cases are when nobody reports it. A lot of times, people do not report these things, okay? If you are ever affected by one of these scams, by ransomware, by something like that, I implore you, please report it to the IC3. It's the FBI's collection area for this sort of stuff. It helps them be able to get funding for more additional agents and things like that to help with this sort of stuff. But a lot of this stuff goes unreported. Organizations are too shy to say, I got hit with ransomware, it impacted me. They don't want to impact their stock prices. They don't want to impact their their individual investors. They don't want to put that information out there. But frankly, folks, all over the place, people are getting hit by this stuff. So we've got to report. We've got to do a better job of that. Now, what we found in our thing is, in our platform is, people who are going to click on the phishing email usually do it about 55% of the time in less than 1 hour. And if you think about what has to happen there, the email has to come in, has to go through all the stuff, get in their email inbox, and it has to be something that's enticing enough for them to click on and decide to deal with that instead of the other things in their inbox. It's got to bubble its way to the top. But I like to think about it this way. If somebody gets 2 emails at the same time, one of them smells like work and one looks like free pizza, which one do you think they're going to click on, right? They can get people to do this sort of action, but they do it very, very quickly. What happens is when you get hit by a campaign in your organization, the results of this can happen very, very fast. And if more than 1 or 2 or 3 people are clicking on things, next thing you know, you're fighting fires all over the organization. Yes?
Do you have to click it to open things, or do you have your preview page open and are seeing what's in it? Is that kind of opening?
So the question is, do you have to click it to open things? We count it as yes. Most of the ones that you used to be able to launch through a preview pane have been stopped by the email browsers. There are some situations where that can happen. I will tell you this, there are things that, the bad guys use the same tricks that marketers do. 1 pixel, or transparent pixels or things like that. where it's actually linking back to a web server and they can see if you've opened it, if you've even viewed it. But to actually launch code generally requires you to open it or to click the link and go to it. But they can tell whether or not you actually saw it. So we count this as actually people clicking on the link. So that's a good question. It used to be much more dangerous. Like I said, there are still a couple of attacks out there that will still do that. There's one that our chief hacking officer has demonstrated a couple times where they can put a link in there to an SMB share and actually pull like an TLM hash. I know I'm getting very technical here, but basically it's something that a password may be able to be derived from just by opening the email. But it's fairly rare that that sort of thing actually happens in the wild. So what do we got to do? We got to arm our users for battle. Again, earlier I talked about warfare. This is going on all the time. Our people are being attacked constantly, over and over again, throughout the days, even while they sleep, because it's queuing up when they get up in the morning. But we've got to do a better job of really arming them for this. And this is what we have to think about is we're trying to provide the users or yourself or even your family, even individuals, because all of this stuff happens to individuals as well. Ransomware, you think it looks and says, oh, this isn't a corporate machine, I'm not going to launch. I'm not going to encrypt all of their family's photos, right? I'm not going to try to do that. No, it doesn't care. I've known a lot of people, or several people rather, that have been hit by ransomware at home and lost pictures of their kids. You know, growing up, everything we have is digital these days, right? We keep all that stuff on our home computers, on our laptops, and things like that. They have lost a lot of information like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect people. We've got to give them the right tools to be able to do this. And by tools, I don't necessarily always mean technical tools. It comes with the knowledge. Knowledge is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to combating these things because so many of them focus on our emotional sides. So something we have to understand is that security awareness and secure behavior are not the same thing. Just because someone is aware of something doesn't mean they care about it. So the traditional approach of rolling out a bunch of stuff and going, memorize this, or here's a bunch of slides about this thing, if they don't care, if it's not relevant to them, they're not going to learn it, they're not going to act on it. And it's kind of like, I can tell you all, there's a blue car in the parking lot. You're like, whatever, I don't care. But if I say there's a blue car in the parking lot and your name is written across the windshield in soap or something, or, you know, all of a sudden, I wonder why that's going on. It is now relevant to you and you care a little bit more about it. But don't just go telling people there's a blue car in the parking lot. Because they'll go, so what? Right? And the mentality that a lot of users have that we need to get past is that the company is responsible for all of the security. And ultimately, that is sort of right. We are ultimately responsible for that in the organization, but they also have a piece. They have an involvement with that. And I don't want to put it all on the users. This is not about being all on the users, but the users are definitely a very important piece when it comes to securing our organization. Okay? It benefits them as well. We don't want to blame the users, but they have to be a part of our overall security program as well. So understand that just making someone aware of something does not mean they're going to take action that's beneficial even to them or to you as an organization unless they understand why they should care. So again, traditional awareness efforts, the belief or hope that information leads to action. All right? Awareness doesn't automatically result in secure behavior. Now, when we're dealing with people, we need to make them have reflexive behaviors. And I love this quote by the great orator Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Okay? We all know he's well known for his speaking and style there, but it's true. You know, and in the military, so I did a lot of time in the military and with the Army, like I said before. One of the things that we always said is, you know, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. You can plan, you can plan, you can plan, but you also have to be ready to improvise as well. Well, the improvising comes from some of the drilling they do. Military, it's drilling. They teach you to do something by making you do it so many times that you just, you think it's crazy, right? I can break down this rifle and put it back together in my sleep. I can do it all these different times. You don't think about that until you're actually in a situation where things are blowing up around you and things are whizzing by you and all that, and something happens and you need to take that weapon apart and reassemble it. In the midst of the chaos, this is where drilling and having something become a second nature to you and a reflexive behavior comes into play. Well, the same thing happens at work. Again, end of the month, accounts payable, accounts receivable. They're running around trying to close the books for the month or the year or whatever it might be. They're running around like crazy trying to take care of all this kind of stuff. And somebody slips in an invoice, phishing email in the middle of all that. Well, there's chaos, there's all this stuff going on. The conditional, the training, the reflexive training makes them see something in that without actually having to stop and spend a lot of time. But maybe you hover the from address and go, that's weird, boom, report it, and you move on. That's what we want to get to. That's the conditional sort of reflexive behavior. They don't have to stop and spend a lot of time on it, but they go, oh, this is weird, seen this before, boom, report it to the people that can take a look at it. It's off their plate and they move on. We have to understand that it's got to be a reflexive behavior because we can't be asking people to stop and spend a lot of time on every email. Can you imagine if every one of your employees spent 30 seconds on every email that came into their inbox? They'd never get anything else done. So our approach has to be, it's quick, we do something, we move on. So, best practices to embrace. Number one, have explicit goals before you start. Number two, decide what behaviors you want to work on and shape. We'll get into this in depth. Treat your program like a marketing campaign with relevant information. Fish them frequently, at least once a month, and don't be a jerk. Okay, so we'll break into this. Have explicit goals before starting. I don't know why that built down again, but here's something where I see a lot of people trip up just getting started. When we start this, we have to be very honest with ourselves about our goals and what our organizational culture will tolerate. So, when we set goals for something like this, we have to have things that we can measure. And so, what do? We say, you know what? In 60 days, I'm going to reduce my malware tickets by 30%. And we may be pulling that number out of the air to start with. We may not even know. But we put that down there, and then we can measure against it and see what we're doing. Because again, better is one of these things that will flow back and forth. Now, when it comes to your organizational culture, it is also very, very important to understand where you are and what you can do. So an organization that has recently been breached or had a significant attack or suffered a loss based on this, that's a dream for a lot of security people, because you can come in, kick down the door, and start implementing stuff like crazy. We're going to do this, we got new policies, all of a sudden the checkbook is open and the money is flowing, and all of these purchases are approved, okay? You can move a lot of things like that. But if you're in an organization that is like, I don't think it'll ever happen to us, we're not really at risk, you're going to have to roll into things a little bit slower. So it's important to know where your company culture is with this. I find that one of the things we lose track of when we actually do awareness training, along with the fact that we're simply trying to make them aware, is that we forget that one of the key goals to awareness training is really to impact your organization's security culture. That's the end game. And security culture is things like how people deal with their passwords on their own. This rolls into home too. It's when we ask somebody to do a task, for example, multi-factor authentication. When you go to log into an account, maybe you have to open your phone open and go to a Google Authenticator app, or maybe you get a text message, right? If you think about that from a user standpoint, we're asking them to do extra steps to do the same job. Normally, they just log in and call it good. Now we're asking them to take extra steps to do the very same thing, right? You have to understand why it's important that they do that, for them to accept that, and for us to be able to roll out those important changes to people. So the ultimate goal here is when you're interfacing with the humans, is to get them to have a stronger security culture. So that when you go to do these other things like that, they go, okay, I get it, I understand why we're taking these extra steps. And then you get far less pushback on that. So your culture plays a big role in what you can and can't get away with within your organization. It also plays a huge role in what type of phishing templates you can give them. So when it comes to phishing, we'll get more into this, but it can be one of these things that can be a little scary for people, especially when you first start rolling out one of these programs. They think that you're trying to get them in trouble. They think that you're trying to do this sort of thing. That's not the goal here. And so when it comes to building this kind of culture in there, that's a key thing that we have to have them understand why we're doing this. It's not to get them in trouble, but to train them, okay? The different kinds of attacks that you do on them, and even the different kinds of training that you do when they fail is going to be largely dependent on your organization's culture. So the second one, decide what behaviors you want to shape. This is also a tricky one. I see people want to come in and they want to change everything at once. I've been guilty of that before. I've come into places and I'm like, oh my gosh, there is so much here that's broken. I want to change it all. But here's the deal. If you try to change too much, you're not going to be effective at much of it. Okay, we have a finite capacity for change. So do the people on the other end of this. We need to work on that and take the bite-sized pieces. Otherwise, we get nothing done. So the magic wand thought experiment is basically, if you could make change, if you could take a magic wand and instantly change the behaviors in your organization, what would they be? Now, I found in most organizations, when I talk to people, it comes down to number one and number two is better password hygiene, stop clicking on silly things, and the third one is often something that's organization specific. Like maybe we need cover letters on our TPS reports, right? Whatever it is in your organization, that tends to be that. But people would generally put these things down on that. And then what you do is you take those things, and that's what you focus on. You don't try to do them all. It's great to make a list, but pick the three things that are going to have the most impact. And if you can change them right now, do it. Now, it's important to understand that it's not going to change immediately. It's going to take a while to do that. And so give it time. Say, you know what? I'm going to give it 6 months or 12 months or maybe even 18 months, depending on the size of the thing that you're trying to do here. But keep your focus on those, and that's where you can make those major shifts. Now, when we're doing this, we need to understand. Now, BJ Fogg, very intelligent guy, very prevalent in human behavioral stuff. I love what he's saying here. When you're going to change behaviors, you're trying to get people to behave a certain way, we have to understand this. 3 truths about human nature: we're lazy, social, and creatures of habit. Design products for this reality. Now, that feels kind of harsh, right? Nobody likes to be called lazy, right? But here's the deal. We're lazy, we're social, and we're creatures of habit. We don't want to do extra to do the same thing, just like I mentioned. If you're going to log into your email account, you can either log in with a username and password, or you can log in with a username and password, wait for a text message to happen, open an app, add that in there. Which way are we going to choose, right? We're going to choose the easiest way that makes sense to us, that we understand. So we have to understand when it comes to doing these things, people are not going to do extra steps just for the sake of doing extra steps to get the same job done. That's what we mean by being lazy. Call it efficient, if you want. But frankly, we're not going to do extra work for no reason whatsoever. So understand that when you're doing this with people, don't try to make them jump through hoops if we don't have to. If it doesn't actually add value to something, be careful the extra things that we're asking people to do. Now the social piece comes into play because regardless, most of us have a social something with us. Whether we seem antisocial or not, most of us are going to look around and we are influenced by social around us. Now some of us, we may want to flow with social, some of us may want to rage against the machine and be antisocial, right? Whatever it is, social pressure has an influence on us as people. And so understanding and looking around, like I'll give you an example. When I was with the Army, I had about 300 people, actually about 400 people I think in the organization we were at. We were a classified facility, had to check your cell phones at the door. There were a lot of rules in place. We had to wear lanyards all the time, okay? So we had to have a lanyard, we said between, chest and waist sort of thing, so you can always see these people. Well, as you know, anytime you get about 400 people together, you're gonna have some people that are less aggressive, a little bit more on the non-confrontational side. But one of the things we expected out of every single person in our organization is if you see somebody walking the floor in our facility and they don't have their badge on them, you are expected to call them out. You are expected to ask them, "Sir or ma'am, where's your badge?" And it doesn't matter if you're walking around with stars on their shoulders or they're a janitor. If they're not wearing a badge, we expect them to call it out. That's not an easy behavior to get people who are not prone to interaction like that to do. But what happened is we ended up getting that culture in place through a lot of trial and effort, a lot of things, where we would expect that if people did not ask somebody, we would test them. If somebody walked by somebody and they weren't wearing a badge, and that person didn't call them out, we would call that person out. Okay, why didn't you challenge them, right? The other thing that would happen is everybody expected to be challenged. So if they didn't have their badge for some reason and they got called out on it, they weren't upset at that individual because they knew that they were expected to do that. Well, then when you hire new people, they come in and they see this dynamic happen and they fall right into suit. They're now not afraid to challenge these people because they see the social norm in the organization is to challenge people without a badge. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about social pressure. Just like with people having bad habits at your office. If you have a clean desk policy and people are leaving junk out on their desk, and other people are coming by going, you should probably pick that up. That's against the policy. Oh yeah, hey, thanks for reminding me, right? You build that social dynamic that starts self-policing. That is a shift in culture. Understand the social pressures that fall on people, positive and negative. If you're asking them to do something like challenge everybody without a badge, understand that that's going to make some people very uncomfortable for a while because of the social pressures of that. Keep that on our minds, right? And creatures of habit? Absolutely. We're creatures of habit because we found the easiest way to do things, which ties back to being lazy, right? We generally don't follow habits that are harder to do than other things. It's just a repetitive nature. And if you're going to break a habit, you've got to understand that it's going to be a challenge there. People are not necessarily going to always do it well the first time. But once you build the habits in a positive way, that becomes a very powerful thing. Because now we have that conditional reflexive behavior, right? A habit is a reflexive behavior. It's what you do when everything else is going on around you. It's what you fall back to. So, something to keep in mind. Now this is in products. This can help you in your organization building products too, but it also helps with training the people, understanding what you're up against. So, treat your program like a marketing campaign with relative information. Now, one of the things on here, I, again, am a very technical kind of guy. I tend to want to fall towards the technical side of things. I can show you guys all kinds of cool hacks, and it can be cool, and you can walk away and forget about it tomorrow, or never make it relevant to what it is you do, and why it ties into the fact that you need multi-factor authentication, right? So when you're teaching these people, make it relevant. Putting people in a room like this once a year, throwing up a bunch of PowerPoints, they're not going to remember it for long. It's not going to influence behavior for long. Okay? So we can't just do that. These presentations you got today, you'll remember this for a little while. There may be nuggets. I hope there's nuggets that hold with you for a while. But the most of this, the gist of this, stuff that wasn't relevant to you, you probably won't remember. You'll remember the things that are relevant. But a year from now, how much of this do you expect you'll actually remember, right? Same thing we do with the users. We put them in a room at the beginning of the year. We go, we're going to train you on all this kind of stuff. And by golly, you're going to be safe until next year when we do it again so we can make the compliance check. No, that's not going to do it. So we need to understand how dangerous it is, how much of a risk our companies are at, and take it seriously instead of just the compliance with it. There's some tricks we can use with this. Here's what I tell people. If you're people that are doing this, or if you are doing this, and you're not necessarily trained in these things, get your marketing department involved. Get those groups involved, okay? They know these tricks, like the nudge theory, right? If you look at this on the left-hand side, look at that picture. It's garbage, it's trash, it's nasty. On the right-hand side, it's an actual picture of what's inside that can, right? Beautiful, well lit. Imagine you're standing there with the bottle from the water that you just drank. Which side am I going to want to put that on? Right? I'm probably going to go for the cleaner side. The thing about nudging people in nudge theory is it's getting them to have a better behavior without actually mandating them to do it. Like the little blurb says, it's like putting healthy foods at eye level instead of junk food. All right? You don't mandate that you can't eat junk food, but you put the healthy food right there in front of them. The marketing groups know this sort of stuff. Your HR teams are designed or trained to deal with human behavior. Many times these people are in there because they're good at that. Remember that when it comes to pushing these things out. Use those sorts of groups within your organization to make these campaigns more effective. Phishing frequently. Doing simulated phishing campaigns is huge because it's constantly in their forefront. We say do it at least once a month. We found that it falls off, the effectiveness falls off if you do it less than once a month. But basically, think about this. You've trained people, and now the idea behind these simulated phishing attacks is to give them a chance to exercise what they learned in the training. If you've ever been to a class where you have instructor-led stuff and then you sit down and do a lab, what do you learn more from? Usually it's the lab. It sticks with you, right? So these phishing attacks, we have to remember this and communicate this with the users. This is not designed just to trick them, to make them make mistakes, to show that they messed up. This is designed to keep it fresh in their mind and give them a chance to practice in a fail-safe environment. Somebody messes up and clicks on an email in one of these simulated attacks, you're not spending the weekend rebuilding. That's a good thing, right? You also tie in, when they do click on the links, you give them a landing page that's a point of failure training. Whoop, you messed up, these are some things you can look for. Or something that's memorable. Quick story, when I'd been on board about 2 months, I'm in the airport, got my phone. I do a lot of hacker conventions and cons, and I use a lot of like dog memes and things like that in those, right? There's certain audiences for that sort of thing. I get an email from Stu Showerman, who I reported at the time, he's our CEO, at the airport on my phone. It says, Eric, I need to talk to you about some of your presentations. And I went, ooh. No, I thought I was in trouble. Google Calendar invite. I hit accept, and I got rickrolled by my own company. Anyone know what rickroll is? It's where they send you the Rick Astley video. It was a big game there for a while, right? It stuck in my head. They got me. And I'm running around talking about this stuff. It was an ingenious way to do it. But the point of failure stuff with the rickroll on my phone started singing Rick Astley from the 80s. Was kind of like embarrassing, shocking, and I'm like, okay guys, you got it, right? Not everybody, not every culture would be accepted with that. I know a lot of lawyers wouldn't enjoy that stuff, okay? But whatever works to make it memorable, I do not do things on my phone anymore after that. If it's something that I'm even questionable at all about, I'll wait till I open my laptop so I can actually hover the links and do things like that, okay? You got to understand that phishing emails are a huge tool in this. But you also have to make it a positive environment. So you don't ball of shame them as much as you would want to put up. It's Bob in accounting again. Look, Bob, you were the worst person in the company. Yeah, right? As much as that would make us feel good because Bob in accounting is still doing this, and I apologize to any Bobs in accounting here. I have yet to be thrown, find out that I actually called someone out there, but it's going to happen. Okay? But you got to understand, this is a positive thing, right? So instead of focusing on the negatives, like Bob screwed up again, we focus on the positives. Like, you guys have gotten so much better. That's a key thing. Make them random so that not everyone gets the same email at the same time, so Bob doesn't pop up and go, guys, don't click on that, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Because that happens. So make them random. So everybody has to experience it and spot them on their own. Personalize them. blanket ones just don't work anymore. Have a little fun. As they get better, put some attachments in there. Q1 payroll, Q4 layoffs, stuff like that that'll get their attention. And finally, just don't be a jerk. Alienate people. Our awareness programs are the key thing that gets in front of most people at least once a year. I would go entire years in my organizations that I would not see, 2/3 of the people that work with. I would never interface with them. I would never talk to them. The only time that I would actually be able to be in front of them was through the awareness programs. Okay? So use that to send your message. Frankly, I think our message needs to change as security practitioners and as IT folks, where instead of being like the Saturday Night Live skit where the guy comes in and just says, move, we've got a reputation, folks, and it's not always great. We need to be known as the people that are there to help users make better security decisions, not as gatekeepers, not as people that are going to get them in trouble. We've got to fix that. And that way people come to us when they have a question or a concern. This is when you do it, when you can get in front of people. Make it a friendly message. Make it a message of being helpful, not being there to get them in trouble. So basically we do 4 steps. Baseline test, which we talked about, 27% is the average. Train your users. You always want to train them before you start testing them. That just makes sense. If you've got kids, I got 3 teenagers. God bless them. 3 teenagers, they've all at least once come back and said, the teacher tested me on something they never taught me, right? That forms resentment. You think about that? So you always train them first. Then fish them, then watch the results. Keep an eye on that. As they get better, make them harder, right? So this again, 6 million users, 11,000 organizations. We saw this. Here's the breakdown on this. Your industry, manufacturing, look at the numbers. 33.2% average click rate, 31% for the mid-sized companies, and what is that, 28.7. You guys are above average on all of those. 90 days, 13, 14, and 9.8. And then getting in 2.16, 3.1. You can make a huge difference at the end of the year within your organizations by training your people. It is one of many security controls, but it is frankly the one that I see people leave the door wide open on more than any other one within an organization. Again, if you have a security control that fails 27% of the time on average, you're going to do something about that, yet we still continue to avoid addressing the people problem. So we got some free resources. I know these slides are going to be available to everybody. Some free resources there. We do have the phishing test that we can test up to 100 of your people just to see where you're at. It's always kind of eye-opening, a little bit terrifying. But a lot of free tools if you want to learn. I recommend in your industries and manufacturing to look at some of the ransomware stuff we have and the prevention manuals. It's always good to have those printed out so if something happens, you can refer to them. Like the ransomware hostage rescue guide, which tells you what you need to know after it's happened, which if you don't have computers online, could be kind of hard to go print after the fact. So I always recommend in your business continuity stuff, you keep something like that online. So that being said, thank you very much.